My name is Rachael Maza. I'd like to thank Auntie Caroline Briggs for the beautiful welcome and your yarn. And I'd like to acknowledge your country, this country that the Bunurong and the Wurundjeri have been the carers of for generations after generations, thousands of generations. And I'd like to pay my respects to the elders of the Bunurong and the Wurundjeri present, included, and their ancestors who watch over this land today, and your ancestors that come with you. So I am the granddaughter of Wagwan Maza, who was sent from the island of Mare in the Torres Strait to Palm Island Mission in 1921. I am the granddaughter of Yidinji woman Ida Maza, who was rounded up along with her mother and her brother from her country, Gordon Vale, Queensland, and sent also to Palm Island Mission in 1919. And I'm the daughter of their fifth child, Bob Maza, who was born on this island, Palm Island. I'm also the granddaughter of Dutch immigrants, Nicholas and Susanna Blankman, who came here in 1950 on the second boat after World War II. And I'm the daughter of their third daughter, Vera Blankman, who was 7 when she first came here, and very quickly learnt that if she was going to survive in this country, she had to very quickly lose her accent, her Dutch accent. So, as a First Nations person of this country, whose narratives have either been completely omitted from the history books, or if we do get a mention, the fact is that it's not been written by us. And we are all familiar with the saying that the history is written by the victor. Well, our history was certainly written by the victors. And no doubt the victor has an invested interest in telling the version of the story that makes them look good, that justifies their actions, and ultimately paints them as the hero. And if we do get a mention, where we are depicted as the losers, the first peoples of this land as somehow fated and belonging to a time gone by and somehow therefore no longer relevant. But despite all their efforts, we're still here. So the lie has to be told and retold and continue to be retold, because one can never admit that what had happened is wrong. So, the words that inspired me coming up here today are history. History is not the past. It is the stories we tell about the past. How we tell these stories, triumphantly or self-critically, metaphysically or dialectically, has a lot to do with whether we cut short or advance our evolution as human beings. And the woman who said those words is Grace Lee Boggs, an American activist. So history is not the past. I mean, this probably sounds really obvious to you, but all these words blew my mind. History is not the past. History is not fixed in time. It is not a fixed in time fact, a truth that lives forever. It is the stories we tell about the past. OMG. This is the line that really blew my brains out. It is the stories we tell about the past. History lives in the retelling of stories, the stories that get retold and retold, passed down through generations. History is being created in the very moment we articulate the words. And how we tell these stories, triumphantly or self-critically, metaphysically or dialectically, has a lot to do with whether we cut short or advance our evolution as human beings. So as a theatre maker, as a storyteller, as a teller of stories, I am reminded of the role and the responsibility on myself and those of us who are in this game, on the how we tell these stories. For it's in the retelling that history is made. History is reimagined. History can be rewritten. It's in the retelling that history lives. So I'm going to give an example of how this wisdom has blown my brains. So to retell the story of my grandfather, for instance, my grandfather, Wagwan, I was 7 when he died, so I didn't know him that well. And I could tell his story in 2 very different ways. So if I was to rely on the records that exist, our family's been trawling through the family records, the Aboriginal Protection Board correspondence, police records, and such similar official records. And he's recorded as being cheeky, lazy, a bad influence on the other natives, has a drinking problem, supplies other natives with this drink, is disobedient, and similar words that go on and on. Or I could tell a very different story. I'm making history, see? At 20 years old, he was sent from his home island, Mare, along with 15 others, against their will, down to the most infamous Aboriginal mission, Palm Island, where he would be married to my Yidinji grandmother. And basically the story is the superintendent saw this, stood next to my grandfather and pointed across the yard and said, what do you reckon about that one over there? And he went, oh, yeah, she looks all right. And that was it. They were married off. Because I wondered, how come a Torres Strait Islander and an Aboriginal woman got together? Anyway, I'm digressing. So he met my grandmother on Palm Island, and it was on Palm Island where my father was born. He was eventually kicked off. The family were eventually kicked off as punishment for refusing to work unless he was paid the same as a white man. And for those of you who don't know, and I'm assuming most of you do, but I'll remind us anyway, in Queensland, all Aboriginal people from 1890s, from all the way up until the early 70s actually, all Aboriginal people were ruled by the Aboriginal Protection and the Restriction of the Sale of Opium Act of 1897. And and all states actually had similar acts. So basically, effectively, this meant not being able to live where you wanted. And Tony Birch said some very similar lines. You can't travel without permission. There were curfews. You couldn't marry who you want. Your children could be removed. Wages were withheld and eventually never given back, what is now known as the stolen wages. And that's just a short list of all the horrendous living experiences that people had living under the Aboriginal Act. So once on the mainland, once my father was kicked off because he refused to work without getting the same amount he wanted to get paid for his work, like anybody. So they got kicked off and sent to the mainland. And my grandfather, he worked out that he could get work and receive the money in his hand if he explained to the employer that he wasn't under the Act. And he got away with this for a few years. And when they finally realised what he was doing, and this is in the records, he said to them, if I can't get paid the same as a white man, I'd rather not work at all. So you can just send me back to Palm Island. And so they did. So, as punishment, he and the family were again removed and sent back to Palm Island. My grandfather was a strong and proud man, refusing to work for less than what he deserved. He was a man of principle. He knew what was right and wrong. I can only imagine how he must have felt, never being able to own his own home, never being able to start a business, not have a bank account. Practicing culture was banned, so he was unable to pass this down to his children. He would experience racism all his life and see his children treated the same. And I think about his life, and I am so proud and inspired by his resilience, his courage, his cheekiness, his defiance, his determination. And I reckon if I had been in his shoes, I'd probably choose to drink as well. When and with whomever I wanted, as an act of defiance. That is the story that I will tell about my grandfather. So we who are in the business of telling stories, we are in the business of rewriting, R-I-G-H-T, history. And I invite us all to relish at the challenge. Thank you.
Visit wheelercentre.com for the best in books, writing and ideas from Melbourne, Australia and the world.